Hi, welcome to our ProAV Academy series on tech terms, where we sit down with Alister Chapman and chat through some of the technical terms that just come up again and again in this industry. Alister is one of the best people I know at explaining complex technical concepts, so hopefully, just by casually chatting with him each one of these terms through, these videos can just help clear up some of the confusion that might be out there on each of these terms. Today we're talking about a lens's back focus, what can happen if it drifts, and how you can correct it. One thing we see on B4 lenses and maybe some video orientated zooms is back focus. What's that used for and why is that important to have?
So the back focus adjustment that you get on most sort of professional level zoom lenses is to compensate for small variations between the distance between the mounting flange of the lens and the sensor. Now with a fixed focal length lens, what we might call a prime lens, that's not really all that critical because for every shot you just turn the focus ring to get it in focus. The focal length of the lens never changes. But when we have a zoom lens, when you change that focal length of the lens by zooming in or zooming out, then the distance between the flange of the lens, the actual mounting flange, and the sensor itself becomes very critical. Because as you change the focal length of the lens, if that back focus distance isn't calibrated or set correctly, the focus will shift as you zoom in and zoom out, and that can create all sorts of problems. It means that you can't zoom in effect because the focus will change. So the sort of your B4 broadcast lenses, your broadcast zooms, your higher end cinema zooms have the ability to adjust that to allow for temperature changes that might make the joints expand a little bit, or just for manufacturing tolerances, and we're talking tiny distances. So it allows you to compensate for all of that by an adjustment at the back.
So what are common scenarios when you might want to do this?
Right, so a common scenario when you might want to do this, something that perhaps we don't do all that often these days, is you used to be able to put filtration behind the lens. So you could put a net behind the lens for some diffusion. You could put little coloured glass filters behind the lens to do that. And adding a little piece of glass in that optical path changes the way the light refracts, and that alters the back focus distance. There have been some examples with some cameras where if you have ND filters behind the lens, that different ND filters are slightly different thicknesses sometimes, and that can shift the back focus. So changing the rear ND could have an impact on that back focus distance. But I think the most common reasons where we need to check it really is going to be if you've taken the lens off, you've been using other lenses and you put it back on again, it might, although it probably should be seated correctly, just slightly different positioning in the mount might be affecting the back focus. Extremes of temperature, if you're working in very cold and then you work in a very warm environment, you might want to check it then as well. So really for me, if I'm using a zoom lens, I'll check that back focus distance actually at the beginning of every day. And a good reason for checking at the beginning of every day is actually it's not always readily apparent if it's out. And you may be shooting and you're focusing and it all appears to be working just fine. And it's not until you try and do a zoom during the shot and suddenly your focus shifts that you realise it's out. And if it's out by a lot, what can happen is the lens still goes in and out of focus. So when you turn the focus ring, it looks like it's focusing correctly, but it's not actually as sharp as it should be. So it is worth checking the beginning of each day if you can, if you've got the time, just to make sure you check it by you zoom in, use a back focus chart, focus on that, zoom out, check that it's still in focus. If it isn't in focus, then you turn the back focus adjustment and you repeat that 2 or 3 times until you can zoom in and out and it stays in perfect focus.
So that chart or something else which is clear to see the focus on remains in focus at wide and at telephoto.
Yeah, and all the way in between. And back focus adjustment is one of the things that actually often separates DSLR zooms from proper cinema zooms. Is DSLR zooms almost never have a back focus adjustment because they wouldn't normally be zoomed during the taking of the photograph. You zoom in, focus, take the picture. You zoom out, focus, take the picture. So if that focus doesn't track perfectly, it doesn't actually matter in a stills camera. But as soon as you go to the video world, you want to be able to zoom in and perhaps during the shot slowly zoom out, or zoom in and zoom out during the shot, in which case back focus becomes much, much more critical. And that's part of the reason why those cinema lenses are much more expensive than your average DSLR zoom.
Thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful. Keep in mind, we also do a whole range of ProAV Academy workshops held right here in our UK showroom, where we cover a whole range of topics, from audio to post-production, camera techniques, business tips, lighting tips, and many more. The main aim of these workshops is to help our customers learn and develop their skills. And there's something about face-to-face training which can just never be replaced by videos like this one. So if you're in the UK, please do get a ticket from the link down below and join us for ProAV Academy.